We're going to start talking about our upcoming project, Immortal Asadi. My boy JC here. He is a co-writer and editor of this project. I'm super excited having him on because he's the one that really got me deep diving into comics more than I was always into comics, but JC definitely opened my mind to I would say 3 layers. What do we say in the military? 2 layers, 3 layers deep, whatever. I definitely passed the first layer of like what it means, like when it comes to the writing, when it comes to backstories, origin stories, things like that, things that people that so no. But yeah, so we're gonna talk a little bit about this project. While Nick's gone downrange, so I said downrange. He's not even like gone.
He's dead to us for today.
So yeah, so JC, dude, man, tell me about it, dude. Like, what was it like when I first hit you up about helping me out with this thing, man?
Honestly, I was pretty stoked from the rip, dog. You sent me the script, and you're like, "Hey, man, can you read this?" And I read it, and instantly got back to you with a ton of like feedback, ton of thoughts. Told you what I liked, told you what you could fix, just without even asking. I just thought it was dope. I thought it was a dope concept. It explores like, history not written by the victors, which is a pretty interesting place to take any story because it gives you a lot more of area to play, especially if you don't take everything that's ever told to you as gospel. If you respect the schooling and education system, but you take it as a way to learn how to critically think, vice actually just being told what to think and not memorizing it and not regurgitating it just to pass under some academic pressure, but to actually learn and connect pieces and connect the dots and see what else is actually out there, vice the way they spin their tale. So I think approaching this story from that perspective is really, really important right now, especially with what's going on in today's society and the way things can be so taken aback and misconstrued and like, and just turned on its head, and the truth always somehow gets lost. It always seems to be in the middle, and everyone wants to be on the right or left. And so approaching the story from that perspective and just being able to attack that story like that is pretty awesome.
Yeah, I think it's really cool. A lot of it, I got inspired. Me and JC used to be roommates when we first joined the military. And I used to do a lot of tons of writing here and there. But what really I liked or really appreciated about JC was that in anything, whether it came to music or to film, fandom, nerddom, like all that stuff, like JC had a really good balance of knowing a lot, but like also like having a life. So I thought it was interesting that like somebody with a life is able to delve that deep into things such as history and fandom that you can learn a lot from fandom, because I remember whenever I would come with lyrics or you would talk to me about film ideas, you would really go deep into like the why those lyrics were being written, what was behind it. The whole story behind certain songs was crazy to me, and I just started approaching history because I know so much history, but I started approaching it more from that angle. Like, yeah, I wonder, why did the person even write this? Like, you mean we see the movie 300, speaking of the Persian Empire, right, and Persian warriors. We look at 300, and a lot of people almost take it like subconsciously do take it as gospel, like, oh, that's the way it was. Like, Persians were the bad guys, and the Greeks were the good guys. And in this story, it was like, and I kind of like what they did in 300, kind of make it like the Greeks were still kind of the bad guys, but the Spartans were the good guys. They were just these guys in the middle that just wanted a bunch of libertarians back in the day that used to fight and wanted freedom. But it's an interesting twist. But it made me think more about that because I do know a lot about Persian history to write something like this, and I couldn't have thought of a better person to hop on me in this project with other than besides somebody who's been there with me talking about the importance of writing, the importance of backstory, than my friend JC here. So So speaking of that, speaking of history, we know about Thermopylae, the Battle of Thermopylae, and everything. You shared a podcast with me not too long ago about Thermopylae. Going a little depth. You want to go ahead and explain a little bit of what that podcast you sent me was about and how it kind of pertains to the story and where we want to take the story?
So the podcast itself was sent to me by my co-host of my podcast, Room 303, where we just talk about all sports and video games and movies and stuff. And so he stumbled upon this podcast called Hardcore History. Let me see if I can get the actual dude's name who does the podcast. But this dude just goes into depth in a staggering amount of detail, right? So it's a 3-part series that explains the Persian Empire, right, from beginning to end, from inception to peak rise and dominance over the continent. And oh, there it is. My boy's in the chat right now. It's Dan Carlin. Yeah. And so he goes into this detail, and it's 3 parts. It's like 12 hours long. And he explains all the players that were in that epicenter, essentially the cradle of modern day civilization. And he starts breaking down how each person played into it and how those people themselves carried themselves, whether it was how they perceived their gods or how they perceived the gods of their enemies. And he goes in and breaks all that down. And so he breaks down the Greeks and the Spartans and the Persian Empire and how it was ruled by Cambyses and then how it stumbled and the battle between the brothers and then how it ended up falling. So it goes into a whole bunch of that. 12 hours is really in detail. Like I always tell my friend that you have to like sit there and actually like pay attention. Can't just like, you can't be messing around on your phone. If you miss
that guy really did his history too when it comes to Persian history, because ancient Persian history is really hard to study if you're like into it, because there's just so many different takes on it. You know what I mean? From the people that were conquered by it. I mean, you have like the Israelites. You know, the Bible takes records of the Persian Empire, the Sumerians, you have the Median Empire, which was originally the empire that that Cyrus came from. You have the Egyptians' history on it, and then you have Herodotus, which is what most of us in Western civilizations consider as like the Bible when it comes to the history of Iran and the Persian Empire, which is crazy to me because it comes to the history and the accounts of the Persian Empire come from the Greek Herodotus, who's the historian. They call him the father of history. It actually comes from the Histories, which is like this collection of books he has of where he would just pretty much write down different stories and histories that he heard. He tried to, He tried to confirm some of them, and some of them he just said history according to, and then would take it and add it to his collection. But it's interesting because it's like 3rd century BC is like the earliest recording of that in the Library of Alexandria, and even then they said that wasn't like really the original collection of Herodotus. So who knows like what changes were made. You know what I mean? It's interesting that Darius himself has his own account of the whole history. It's crazy when you think of that because we do kind of take it as gold.
Yeah, and it's very interesting when all this is presented, because you have the aspect of whenever another kingdom successfully conquers, the first thing they do is tear down the existing. They pillage, they rifle, they set everything ablaze, and they target places of worship, right? They go after your gods, and then they go after libraries. If you had any form of written word, it was something that they targeted and burnt down. It's still something that happened in more modern history, right? When in Americas and the revolutions and all these other things, like libraries are targeted all the time, and they're burnt down because they don't want that knowledge to carry on. Without that knowledge to carry on, then people lose themselves, right? So they no longer have that connection to their ancestors. And then from that aspect, it's easy for those civilizations to assimilate the conquered people into their own indoctrination, right? Because that's what every nation, country tries to do. They try to indoctrinate. That's what you see happening worldwide. Everyone has their religious beliefs, their viewpoints, the way they perceive economics, the way they perceive philosophy, the way they perceive science, the boundaries of morality they're willing to push. All that stuff is constantly being fed into by these civilizations. And that's where they get their indoctrination. That's where they get the philosophy. That's how they're able to breed a nation that goes on and perpetuates that information or that perception.
It's crazy too because it goes with the whole saying, the victors write history, right? They're the ones that decide what history is going to be. But it's very interesting because the Persian Empire was so huge, or so vast. It had so many people that actually liked being under the rule of the Persian Empire that certain documents, scrolls, and certain parts of their history were hidden purposefully, so that way when a new empire came through or somebody came to pillage, it would be able to be uncovered sometime in the future to preserve that history. That's why I feel, I don't know if you definitely watch, you're a film guy, so you've definitely seen Indiana Jones, like all the archaeologists. There was a point in time where I wanted to be an archaeologist because I thought it was like Indiana Jones with the whip and you get the cool hat. But what I really liked about the film though is that they would uncover a history and then they'd be like, yeah, but did you know that the Ark of the Covenant was really here and all this stuff? And you're just like, where do they get this information? And it's crazy because archaeologists are always at the very front of history when it comes to recovering history. And it's like archaeologists know, and I think for the most part, archaeologists have preserved a lot of the Persian history because of that. When people ask me, what do I use for research when it comes to writing these things about ancient cultures? And a lot of it comes just from articles written by archaeologists that have made findings, and then from those findings have been able to deduct and create a timeline with what we already know, what to debunk or to confirm what we've received as gospel.
Right. And archaeologists are kind of on the forefront of why I always say time isn't linear, because civilizations are born, they're bred, and then boom, they extinguish, just like dinosaurs were put out, just like the Persian Empire was put out, just like the great Greeks and the Spartans and the first democracies, and then you have Mongolians going and killing, I think it's like 10% of the world's population with Genghis Khan, and how they were just dominating the Eastern Asias all the way into the Eastern Europe's. Like, so when they go through and they do raise the villages and burn those people and all that stuff, they essentially extinguish that timeline. And that's why I always say time isn't linear. You can always look at like the Egyptian pyramids, right? Today, in all our technological advancements, whether it's internet, us talking around the world, making 3,000 miles seem like nothing, we're face to face right now, and then we have a bunch of listeners with us, we still don't know how they built the pyramids, right? And that, if that doesn't blow your mind and show you that time itself isn't linear, then I don't know.
It's aliens.
You think it's aliens?
Me and Nick said we think it's aliens.
I actually think that through their study of like plants and animal life, they were able to create some sort of process of anti-gravity, and using anti-gravity as their main piece of science, they were able to build these pyramids. And one of the things that isn't really said anymore is these pyramids used to be covered in like precious gems.
Not just the rocks that we see out there.
Yeah, it's not just the way it was smooth. They were so smooth and so clean and so beautiful and pristine, right? So there was almost no ridges, but through the loss of their civilization, loss of war, like I said, with the burning of libraries, and they didn't even have a lot of written word. They had more of the pictures, the hieroglyphics, and things of that nature, right? So through the loss of that preservation of education and knowledge, we lost that process. But if it was smooth and there was even less to grab onto, and then the intricacies with the traps and the doors and getting to room, you can really see that but they had a very profound grasp on technology, and
Yeah.
somewhere along the line it got lost.
That's crazy that you say that, especially when we think of all ancient civilizations. There's always this like mystique hidden behind it. There's a lot of mystique too hidden behind the city of Persepolis, which was one of the biggest one of the biggest cities. If not, some claim it to be the capital of the Persian Empire during that time. That the Persian Empire was at its peak. But that being said, I think it's interesting that there's so much mystique and so much wonder hidden behind these ancient civilizations, especially the Persian civilization, that I'm surprised that not many people have really tapped into this for, I would say, entertainment value. You know, Egyptians, right? We've had things from the Ten Commandments. You mean we have the Mummy. You know, there's a whole bunch of different what do you say, lore and entertainment through television and books with these ancient civilizations, and we don't see it with the Persian Empire. And I feel like there's a lot of wealth of good story missing behind there. I think Prince of Persia tried to tap into that a little bit. I was a huge Prince of Persia video game fan. I used to play it online. The movie was okay. Assassin's Creed is kind of Assassin's Creed. Whoever their writing team is phenomenal. They're always tapping into ancient cultures and civilizations. But I feel like there's a wealth of story and knowledge to tap into there for entertainment. And I'm not saying to exploit it, but most stories are inspired by old stories and events.
Yeah, definitely. So there's character archetypes for a reason. You know, there's story archetypes, there's the presentations and stuff like that. So a lot of stuff is definitely based on other stuff, and very rarely is anything ever original. It's always just a more unique flair, or maybe like a specialized take on that specific topic. So I think that a lot of the reason why a lot of this stuff hasn't been tapped into before is, you know, we always say it's a small world, but, you know, we're finally more connected than ever. So the common average everyday man can go and look this stuff up themselves and grow their own fascination in it, and therefore there's a bigger, more robust market for them to tap into. If more and more people are actually interested in this topic, and they know people are interested in this topic, then they'll actually invest into pursuing that kind of stuff. And you've seen it just more like how everything been presented. Like you mentioned Assassin's Creed, and Assassin's Creed is like on volume 57.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they've done sailing American ships. They've done Egypt itself. The new one that's coming out is Norse mythology, and you had everything from in between that you could think of. And so the more that information is put out like that and it gets people's curiosity piqued, is the more you'll see these, you know, the inception of these ideas introduced to more modern culture.
Yeah, I think the Persian one's definitely one that people can really tap into. So it's such a rich culture, rich history. A lot of the, even when it comes to like monsters and fantasy, a lot of the things that we know through Greek mythology and even going into the medieval times come from Persian cultures. For example, like I think it's pronounced Mertikuara. I don't know how to pronounce it right, but it's called the Manticore. And the Manticore is actually a monster that was actually a monster in myth in the ancient Persian culture. And they actually take it from because the Persian Empire was so huge, they actually would take a lot of different stories from different places that they've conquered, and it morphed over time the monster morphed over time to fit the Greek narrative, and then eventually the medieval narrative. But I think it's crazy because a lot of these monsters that we like have origin stories within the Persian Empire. And I think everybody likes a good origin story, you know what I mean? Where things came from when it comes to civilizations, when it comes to religion, when it comes to ideas. I mean, I think that's one big thing. Assassin's Creed, I think, is definitely diving in there. It's Ubisoft that always does it. They did Prince of Persia, and then they kind of ditched it for Assassin's Creed because Assassin's Creed started taking off. But I think they might come back around and revisit the Persian Empire and make something out of that, because when it comes to the myth, the mythology, Persian mythology, and history, man, I'm telling you, man, it's like some of this stuff sounds so made up, and it might be made up because a lot of it's history according to the kings of Persia. But you know what I'm saying? It's just so much wealth of knowledge to be put out, and like you said, because it's so accessible to people. I mean, a lot of things like the histories. It was really hard back in the day when I was going through homeschool to even get access to that. When I heard about Herodotus being the father of history, I was like, well, where can I find this book? Like, everybody's using him as a source. Like, where can I get to his book at? And now online, you can go through every single one of his books, and you're like, man, this guy covered a lot. And then it makes you even more realize, well, then where's this guy's source? And you just want to keep Googling and go down that rabbit hole, finding out where the actual source is. And then it always turns into this tree branch of like, well, history according to Darius, history according to the Sumerians, history according to the Greeks. And you're like, damn, like, I guess we're never going to get that firm answer. But Google's allowed us to not accept, well, like you said, I would call it the access of information, has allowed us to not stop at, yeah, I'm going to take that as scripture. All of us want to go into, where is this coming from?
Yeah, exactly. You don't have to accept what you were taught in infancy as gospel, because there's so many players in the world, and you know, we're in America, and we're essentially the baby of the world, right? We're the youngest country, you know, minus like Bosnia Herzegovina, which split like 18,000 times and stuff like that. But we're this world power who's really only been around for almost 250 years. And so because of that, that's why we still lash out in our infancy. We don't have as much profound tact to handle world situations. It's almost like they've given a nuclear weapon to a child, right? Which is essentially what they did with America. And then because we were the first one with that weapon, we became this power player. And then we had access to both oceans, and from there it was a wrap. And we've been able to establish ourselves as a power player. But we're not where the cradle of life started. You know, there's a profound beauty to that. You know, it's ravaged because of the thousands of years of war and conflict and civilization growing, you know. And so you have the torn down structures, you have the Holy Land, you have these places with these profound energies that just speak to people differently. That isn't explored in America. We're taught American history. We're taught, you know, European history, because that's where most American ancestors come from. So you never really get to delve into these lores, right? And these civilizations that treated magic as this real thing, and magic can sometimes be explained as it's just science that hasn't been figured out yet. That's what a lot of magic can be. It's just something that science hasn't explained. And then there's the truly, you know, magical of it, with the different dimensions and the spirituality and the unexplained that science will probably never be into tap into unless we're talking about dimensions. But a lot of that stuff is where man stems from. And that's why telling this story and telling it accurately and having all the people that we know involved is super essential, because it presents an alternative, and an alternative should always be presented, whether it's correct or not.
That's interesting too, because with this story, it's like even I don't think I have all the facts straight. I purposely made this a fantasy for that specific reason, because there's so much I want to do to honor ancient Persian history, because it's so rich, and I think it doesn't really have to be altered that much to make it entertaining, like I said before. But at the same time, it's like I can only dig so deep for sources, and like you said, I have to bring people on board. You mean I got my Persian confidants that I talk to when it comes to like, hey man, like where is this from? Where does this come from? What's this name mean? Things like that. Little things of like, hey, what is the history that you've been told? And it takes a lot of digging to get it right. We look at Hollywood sometimes. And I don't know, like if you ever experienced that, like with your culture just being Hispanic, sometimes people will do something with like a Hispanic kind of background. You're like, I kind of missed the mark a little bit. And sometimes you feel like, man, all they had to do was just like one small Google away, and they could have nailed that. People would have been like, they got it. They got it. You know what I mean? And I really want that with this, but at the same time, it's fantasy. And I'm going to do my best to, we're going to do our best to give it the most, put Persian history, ancient Persian history out there in the front. I honestly think, even a lot of Persians will be like they kind of know that history, but when we put it out with certain details, people are like, I want to know what really went down during that time, because these are real names, these are real people, these are somewhat kind of real events. So I'm trying to burst something out of this from something that it's almost real, but then kind of making my own conspiracy theory, because everybody loves conspiracy theory. And I think a lot of when I watch a lot of these documentaries when it comes to the ancient Persian history on History Channel, on Timeline, it's funny because they like making their own conspiracy theories. It's like, maybe, they get that the archaeologists like, here's my chance to throw out my theory, and hopefully that sparks interest in somebody that's watching this documentary. And that's what I want to do with this comic. I really want people to read it and be like, man, was the history really like that? And they're like, okay, I see that the real person was really this way and that way, but that's an interesting take. And that's really what I want to do. I kind of want to shake that. So going into that, the story, the Immortal Asadi, man, what are you excited about in this? Without giving too much away, there's certain, whatever, man. If it leaks out here, it leaks out here. The real fans that have lasted this long within our stream ones enjoy the information. But what do you think, man, so far about this, like this whole world, man?
Oh, I think it's great, man. I love the potential it has, and as a connoisseur of fantasy and mythological creatures like myself, I think it's going to tap into a lot of that, and it's going to take people down a path that's going to be very, very interesting. The fact that it ties into history, but also has those kind of flares, those aesthetically pleasing aspects that people like to tune into, the escapism, right? So the fact that you're able to take realism and escapism and kind of morph them into its own, perfect child is gonna grab a lot of people. So I think probably the best part is going to be a lot of the backdrops. So the backdrops where a lot of the events are taking place are going to have like very real aspects to them,
Yeah.
and because of that, right, it's gonna almost counterweight the fantasy and keep it grounded. So, despite us throwing in elements of, creatures from beyond the pine and things like that, because of where it's taking place, how it's drawn, the colors of the sun, the shape of the mountains, maybe historical landmarks pop up in it, and it's going to create this kind of almost dreamlike, surreal nature for it. And people are going to be like, man, is that really how it is over there? And then the people who grew up there, who learned the stories, who sat down with their grandparents and listened to them tell the stories that passed for generations and generations, they're going to be like, oh yeah, it's not like that, but it's like that.
Yeah, exactly. I do expect a lot of like fact checking from people every day, but at the same time, I'm glad I'm really like harping on the fantasy part, because it is, and we want to get it as accurate as possible. But like, people will read this, they'll definitely know we did our research. I think it's interesting how you talked about like the landscaping, and hey, Danny Asadi has just joined us. Danny Asadi is actually my best friend. He actually made the theme song for this character, and is actually the face of the Immortal Asadi. His music's awesome, and it really, when you listen to it, I actually can close my eyes and think of a time where the Immortal Asadi existed. But yeah, shout out to Asadi. Thanks for coming through the chat, man. I really appreciate that, like big time. And I really appreciate all the support we've been getting from your fans who are mostly Persian, which is awesome, and I think it's really cool that Persians are really into their history. But going back to what you were talking about the backdrops, the Battle of Pelusium, right? It's a very famous battle between Cambyses the second and the pharaoh. I think his name was Amasis, but like a lot of people pronounce it Amos. But yeah, the Egyptians were very superstitious of cats, right? They like feared them because they were like gods. And there's a lot of different stories on how Cambyses conquered Egypt. And I remember looking at one of these pictures of the Battle of Pelusium, and it was like a Persian cavalryman with a cat in his hand, like chucking it at the walls of the Egyptian cities. And it's like, and then I thought, like, because I remember seeing that as a kid, and I was like, yeah, that's how the Persians defeated Egypt. Like, they threw cats. And then I found out that was kind of like a myth. You mean kind of like a just story? And I was like, oh, well, that kind of sucks. But I just think it's interesting, like you say, like, people that know the stories that stories have been passed through generations, and that's one of them is that that the Persians conquered Egypt through their weakness, which was cats. They painted their shields like had cats on their shields. They you mean, for lack of better terms, kennels, had little kennels of cats and threw them at the Egyptians, and the Egyptians fled, which I'm pretty sure it didn't make every Egyptian run away. I'm pretty sure there was still a bloody battle, which there was. But I just think it's interesting that you mentioned the whole passing down of stories. That's one of them. But I think it's our opening battle. The page opens with a battle scene, 525 BC. It's kind of in ballpark because there's a whole bunch of different dates floating around there. But 525, 524 BC is around when this battle happened. Cambyses goes down to Egypt. He wants to expand the empire of Cyrus, his father, who passed. And that was the one independent state that posed a huge threat besides Greece at the time. And yeah, I always found it interesting that battle because that's how it went down. Also, there's also talks of like he wanted the pharaoh's daughter. The pharaoh gives him he gives him a fake daughter and places a real one because she doesn't want his daughter to be a concubine. And it's just all this different hearsay she say. But I think that's the best part, man. It's like the hearsay she say, because then it really allows you to step in there and create your own story. And I think as long as you stamp it with the fantasy, hey, this is a fantasy, then people can't really come at you sideways for.
Yeah, so there's always going to be somebody who's like, no, that's not how it is, because that's how people always are. You know, if you're a science major, you probably picked apart Interstellar and picked apart Inception and said, that's not how that stuff's going to go. But there is very real plausibility that some sort of incident of that nature could happen. It probably never ever happens the way it's said, but there's probably some truth to the way that people are portraying that story. And so and with that being said, like that's what lends itself to such like a creative well to just pull from. And there's so much that you can do with it because like we talked about at the beginning with Herodotus and being the father of history. And then we were talking about Dan Carlin's Hardcore History podcast. And, you know, there's just so much out there. And you don't know how much is true. You don't know what's corroborated and what isn't. But it all like ties together. And you can see the thread that intersects them. And it's fascinating when you delve into, you know, these cultures that have so many gods, right? It's not just a god. It is a god for everything, like everything. Economics, water, you know, moon, gold, love, hate. You know, like they have a god for everything, and so that lends itself to being so much richer. And that's where, you know, as a storyteller, that's what you want in your stories, is that you have something so awesome to tell. And, you know, and when you're dealing with historical events, there's going to be people who are rubbed the wrong way, because a lot of people if they're not, the cognitive dissonance will prevent them and conflict them from allowing them to perceive another truth with theirs. Because when they come into conflict, that's where cognitive dissonance comes into play, right? When you have one truth that you hold so tight, but then you're presented with another truth, that's when your mind and your heart starts conflicting and you don't know what to believe anymore. And so that's what we're going to be doing. That's what we're going to be presenting. And with something that is that, flamboyant in nature, that's just going to draw so many people in and also push so many people away, you're going to have your detractors, but there's going to be people who love it. And so that's the only thing you can hope for. You can't worry about the people who are going to dislike it. You can only worry about the people who are going to like it.
That's very true. Luis says, or Semperdelco is my brother over there. He says it's like the newest Hercules story with The Rock. He's comparing my comic book. I kind of like that version too, because it tells us a story, part of The Rock. Part of Hercules, where it's like, hey, this is probably how it actually went down, and somebody wanting to create a story on it. But yeah, that's really what it is. So going in now that we've talked about the landscape and the time period, the Immortal Asadi, the character Asadi. I'm just gonna do like a quick introduction for I appreciate all the backers that are going there. They've been looking at a lot of artwork of the Immortal Asadi. So a lot of people get a taste from the Immortals when they watch the movie 300, right? They're posed as these the baddies that are this mystique that the Persian emperor finally decides, or Xerxes finally decides to unleash against the Spartans to try to take it down, and then the Spartans just push them over the cliff. Easy day, we will test their immortality or whatever, and which is, they won, so yeah, they do get to write that history, but it's very interesting, the actual history of the Immortal. They were like the elite tier 1 unit for the Persian military. They were trained from a young age, to live out in the wilderness, marching crazy, like what we would consider today like our ruck marches. Then they were also had to tame a wild horse. It was like one of their many feats. But they were also trained in different weapons. Hand-to-hand combat all the way to archery, and they had to be masters in all of these. And they were also used as the royal Persian king's royal bodyguards. So they were always a fixed number. And the reason why people Herodotus named them the Immortals was because they would be a fixed number of 10,000. They would get slain. The next day, they would return with 10,000. They also had this thing where they would recover bodies from the battlefield, so that way people wouldn't see that those bodies would become deceased and it would decompose. So the next day, they would see them pop back up like daisies, back to the same fixed amount number when they actually had reserves in the back. So it created this myth of them actually being immortal because people didn't have Google there to fact check, or Snopes, whatever that site is, to fact check the Immortal, whether they were immortals or not. And that always interested me, and I was like, man, nobody ever people like to. Let's tell the story about Leonidas, that one Spartan. That was a beast. In every special forces or tier 1 unit in the history of ancient civilization up till now in the United States, people like to pinpoint a group of people in there and tell a story about them. They were part of the most elite soldiers. Like Rambo. You pick that one Green Beret in there and you make a movie about them. So I was like, what? Nobody's ever really done a movie about this unit. And this unit has been one of the most terrifying, most intimidating units, to where people thought they were immortal. They were experts in psychological warfare, and I thought it'd be really interesting to pick a character out of there, one character out of the many of them, because they all used to wear this mask that would kind of hide their identity, which was also adopted because the Immortals changed their uniforms over the different periods. But I thought that would be interesting. I like that concept of taking somebody out of a masses. It's singling one person. Like, everybody knows the story of the Spartans, but no one knows the story of the King Leonidas.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it presents, so, warfare is one of the oldest things that men have done, from the beginning of time, right? Just like prostitution has been around for centuries, right? And now it's this illegal trade, and and it's as old as war. It's one of the oldest professions known to man. So it's really pretty interesting to look at the precursors to what we consider special warfare today, right? Because warfare has changed so drastically with the advances in technology and the way we use ammunition now, vice then, So they had the bow and arrows, and that was how they had a lot of their conflict for ranged combat. They used a lot of open fire with oil and tars and stuff like that in order to create a more diverse war field, right? And they had the old school line them up, shoot them down, like if there's rock'em sock'em robots, right?
That's honor. That's what you fight with honor.
And that's what it was. It was you fought with honor, and you went into battle with your prestigious armor that is just decked out from beginning to end, and you go to blows with another man, knowing that there is nothing more pure than in that moment with its survival at its finest, right? Because that is the goal of every one person in the world, right? If you break us down to our one root, it's survival at all costs. That's why people will steal. That's why people will kill. That's why people enslave, and and from there we build our comforts. But so looking at it from that perspective and introducing the Immortals into a broader context and exploring the way they combated and how they carried themselves is really awesome, because like we said, I mean, Cambyses' empire was so large. They took up so much land. It was like one of the initial cradles of life, and they had their hands in slavery and trade and introducing spices and textiles into these new and different robust worlds. And they first started doing all this trades and stuff. And so looking at it from that perspective, they had to have something that they could fall back on, and that's where the Immortals come into play. The Immortals were so feared. That's why rebellions were quelled so quickly. That's why there weren't these empires raising up against them, and they just kept taking more land and more land and more land, and creating, essentially one of the first modern day empires known to man. And so it's from those perspectives, it introduces such a rich and vast storytelling environment that, it's almost a shame that it took this long for someone to really look into it like this, right? So, I mean, you had the Immortals movie that came out like 2011 that talked about gods battling each other in the heavens, and it told like the Greek myth of Theseus and the Minotaur, and that movie was tight. And
I like that.
But it's always Greek mythology. Like, there is so many other cultures and things that are fascinating and that have all of these gods that you can delve into and push into. So I'm excited. So the story itself has so much play, and what we have planned for it, obviously you can't tell because then there's no real reason to read it. But what we have coming and what we've talked about spinning off and having all these other stuff. So it's like, why is he saying Monkey King? Oh, there's another message.
The Monkey King? Yeah. Right, Luis was talking about the Monkey King. That was a good movie. But yeah, so like we were saying, so delving into this, now we've talked about the Immortal unit, talking about the Immortal Asadi. So this character, I'm singling him out from the 10,000 because there's always this fixed number. Everybody sees everybody as, whether it's SEALs, SAS, Green Berets. If you think of them as this unit, right? And then you delve in deep in there and in this story, I'm delving deep into one Immortal, just one of many of them that are in this unit. And it brings in the warrior aspect of everybody's the same. I mean, nobody's better than each other in a unit, and they all have each other's backs. And with this story, Asadi actually stands out from the rest of the Immortals because he has the ability to interpret dreams, which is a big thing within ancient Persian history. The kings were very into having their maidens and their confidants and their what do you call it, advisors that were able to interpret dreams.
Mystics.
Even going back to the Bible, Daniel in the Bible is actually summoned by the king. At that time, they called him the king of Babylon, but it was really the Persian king. It's just the way history was, the scrolls were mixed, and what they would call, what empire they would call which empire. But even Daniel himself had interpreted dream from one of the Persian kings, and that was a really big thing, was having the ability to interpret dreams. You talk about how back then people were more into the spiritual things that like we call magic now, but you helped me a lot with the dream sequences and everything for the Immortal Asadi. He has the ability to the day before he goes against an adversary, he has a dream, and in his dream, the weakness of his adversary is exposed. He's able to decipher his dream the next day and is able to destroy his enemy. A lot of the Persians, they would do like one-on-one in the camps during their downtime. Surprise, back then they had downtime in the military as well. They would have lions. Sometimes they would have lions in their camps, and they would fight the lions as practice. They would fight each other as practice, one-on-one. And Asadi's an undefeated champ. He's the people's champ there. He's able to defeat anybody who's ever challenged him, man or beast. And so talk about the sequences, the dreams, and what you think that brings to the table in this story.
Yeah, so I really got lost when we were doing a lot of the mystical stuff, when we were doing the dreams and the interpretation. So I like to use the dreams itself as a way of foreshadowing, right? Maybe it's direct or non-direct, but it's just the way that it presents the mystical side of Asadi and the Persian cultures and the cultures from the essentially the cradle of life, because they had such a more robust interpretation of things, and they lent themselves to ritualistic sacrifices that I'm not necessarily advocating for, because I believe a lot of it is probably really, really dark and can corrupt the soul of man, right? But that is something that they really delved into, and they believed in bleeding the dimensional lines, whether it be the dimensions of life and death, and that's why they buried their dead the certain way that they did. That's why you said it's yourself, when they would pull the Immortals wouldn't let themselves be seen dead, right?
Yeah.
In order to perpetuate that stereotype, that stigma, that fear, and to keep breeding it in the minds of man, right? Because that's how it spread, word of mouth, like wildfire. And that was more powerful than the Immortals could ever be, right? So that's what lends itself to a lot of the mystical stuff and the way that these cultures present themselves. And so when we got into the dreamscape, we're introducing the main antagonist of this story. I just thought it'd be a very interesting way for us to get into it. I like to delve with a lot of pictures that portray something, if you know what they portray, right? So like, dragons can mean something in a dream. Losing your teeth can mean something in dreams, right? So usually losing your teeth in dreams is that means that someone passed away, or someone is going to pass away, right? If you believe super heavily into dreams, right? And so there's these constants in dreams that mean so many things, whether it's dragons or fire or inversion, like if you're looking in a mirror, if you're falling, what an eagle can mean if you have eagles in it, and stuff like that. So when we were creating the dreamscape, I wanted to pull from a lot of those things and foreshadow the next 15 issues, the next 30 issues, or where the tangential stories will go. If we ever decide to introduce new characters, a new comic, a new storyline, I wanted to make sure that we were setting those up and tying a continuous thread that the reader from the beginning, as they follow the story, they're going to see and appreciate it when it all ties together, right? Whether it's like 30 issues in, or if it's tied in at 15 issues and then this story is tied in at 30. But if you've been constant, you can pick those up. But if you haven't, you're not missing anything, because it's just these little Easter eggs that you get to throw in there, and that's how the dreams.
There's always those fans that pick them out.
Definitely, bro. You always think, oh, no one's going to get this. And then someone sits there and combs through with a magnifying glass, reads it 17 times, rolls the comic book into a circle, puts it in their pocket, takes it to the beach, reads it an 18th time, and then figures it out. So most of the time, writers think they're smarter than their readers, but it's never like that. Never like that. It's usually that the readers are smarter. It usually is, and especially because they can have more expertise in it. And so then that's the beauty of it, interacting with those readers and seeing and hearing from them how it evoked a certain emotion from them, or how the story tied to them, what they liked, what they didn't like. All that stuff is awesome, because that's how you create a more complete story the next issue and the next issue and the next issue. With that being said, I can't express enough how important dreams are. Without saying what's important about these dreams, but I've already alluded to quite a bit of it in the last 5 minutes. But so in the first issue, what we can say is there's 2 different dream scenarios in the issue. So with that being said, I don't want to say anything else, so you go ahead and pick it up, bro.
Dreams leave for a good cliffhanger. It was like, no. Yeah, so that would be it. So we talk about Asadi's ability to interpret dreams, obviously skilled and everything when it comes to being a warrior. Now, the soldier, the mind of a soldier. Asadi is loyal to the king, of course, because that's what the Immortals are. They are the king's #1 tier 1 unit. They're also the royal bodyguards as well. That being said, it's almost, they have this like sense of duty because they are groomed. They go through their own selection process to become this loyal bodyguard fighting war machine for the king's interest and the Empire's interest. Now, with this story, we're going to delve a lot into the loyalty of an immortal. We talk about loyalties of soldiers, loyalty of people because they have a sense of duty. Is it to their nation, or is it to their government? Is it to their king? Is it to a god? In this sense, Asadi is led in a crossroad. As everybody knows, when it comes to ancient Persian history, you have 2 brothers, Bardia and Cambyses, that are 2 brothers at conflict. Now, there's a whole bunch of different stories and different accounts of history, whether they got along, whether one wanted to kill the other, when did the other one kill the other, how long did the other one live before the other one, how long did Bardia live after Cambyses was killed, or which one was killed first. But we all do know that there was quelling, there was a lot of a revolt when King Darius took over the throne, who is a distant cousin of the 2 brothers. An interesting character that's also going to be introduced into the story, who is a famous and well-known person in history in the Persian Empire. But a lot of people don't know that Darius had a lot of fight back when he had claimed the throne, when he ascended to the throne after both of these brothers died. Interesting enough, there's some accounts in historical findings, archaeological findings, that Bardia actually had a good 1.5 years fighting, trying to fight back Darius. Whether it's the real Bardia or not, we don't know. We just know there was quelling. So that being said, the Immortal Asadi, when it comes to the Immortals, King Darius had the Immortals. He also had them underneath his rule. But I think it's interesting to think of if were there any defectors, whether it was everybody just blindly following King Darius now that he's king. If you're an immortal, or you're somebody tied to that army, you have this camaraderie, and you fly under this one banner under King Cambyses, are you going to be the type of person that just gives up his loyalty to that dynasty and go straight into, like, yeah, this guy says he's king now, and we're gonna fight for him now. We're now his immortal and his bodyguard. So I would encourage a lot of people, when you read this, you're going to really see that the lines aren't black and white when it comes to loyalty. And this happened a lot with even within the Persian Empire, when a certain kingdom was taken over. Do these people just blindly follow the king? Are there some that want to fall under the Persian Empire? What do you think about that, JC?
Uh, so the best way I want to frame it is like with some Kanye West lyrics for the
All right.
for the crazy man out there, right? So it's No Church in the Wild is such a great song because
Mm,
it really makes you question what loyalty is and why loyalty is, right? Because he asks human beings in a mob, right? What's a mob to a king? What's a king to a god? What's a god to a non-believer
mm,
who doesn't believe in anything, right? So none of that stuff means anything to a non-believer, but what's a king to a mob? And so we're essentially going to ask those questions and delve into loyalty and understand why it's not so black and white in life. It's not so black and white in history. It's not so black and white ever, right? Because people always say that they love somebody, and then they end up doing the most hurtful things to that person that they love, right? And so that always presents itself as an interesting dichotomy and an interesting conflict of character, a conflict of man, right? And there's one constant in man is that we're we are mistake laden no matter what. No matter how hard we strive to be perfect, we make mistakes. And so that's kind of how we're going to be tackling this story and how it's going to be presented, because there's going to be a lot of people who say they love each other, a lot of people who mean something to each other, who instantly flip sides at the drop of a hat.
mm. Yeah. So I like I like the way you put that. I put that a better way. That definitely sparked my own interest with my own story because I know exactly what you're talking about, and that just hit me with the way you said that. I was like, wow, okay. Hopefully, the people that are backing us watch this, and then it's gonna hit them like a ton of bricks when it happens in the story. Because you're right, it's like you said, at the flip of a coin, somebody can change their allegiance. That's a huge thing in this story is allegiance. Asadi is stuck in this middle of this power struggle, not just with these two kings and Darius, but with well, two sons of the king Cyrus and Darius, but with with a mythos, with a mythology that's out there as well, which is a very interesting. I think is going to give this story a huge, what do you call that, colorful palette of ideas and conspiracies for people because the Persian mythos it has so many different, like I mean, things from like the origins of the genie, which are called jinns, where they come from. It's crazy to go to the origins of all uh, these mythological characters that we know. In the ancient Persian history, and to put them in a story in their original, like what they really look like in the beginning, I think is going to be awesome. I think people are going to really like that, and it's going to be one of the, like, whoa, what is this thing? That being said, we have 12 seconds remaining. JC, if we can hop back on and maybe go another whatever to wrap some stuff up. But 4, 3, 2, 1, we'll hop back in live in a bit.